Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet. This is Ken Weeb from Sportsnet. You are watching Kenny and Renny and the weekly Kenny and Renny long-form show that we are always so proud to put on and so happy to put on. Sorry we missed you last week. We thought Remembrance Day, it being a Thursday and just a couple hours out from, the most important part of that day, we thought we would make sure that we honored that day and took a step away from it, which is what we did. But we are returning, and we are returning with a bang because we have got an absolutely great show for you. Just a ton of fun. Ken, why don't you introduce our first guest? I'll introduce our second guest, but you start off. He's going to join us in about 5 minutes. What do you got?
Yeah, great to be with you, Sean. Obviously, a super fun day, and after getting some great news today that I will be joining you in Columbus for the Jets at Blue Jackets next week, we figured what better time than to welcome our good friend Aaron Portzline of The Athletic back to the program. I've known Aaron for a long time, back from his Columbus Post-Dispatch days as a fellow newspaper writer, but looking forward to having him on. There's obviously a lot to discuss with Pierre Luc Dubois playing such incredible hockey for the Winnipeg Jets, and also the great start that Patrik Laine had as well. We want to dig into that with him as well, and we know there's been a lot happening with the Blue Jackets in the last 6 months or so. So it's going to be a fantastic chance to get caught up with Aaron, who is in sunny Phoenix, Arizona for the Blue Jackets game there, I believe, tonight. So excited to get him started, and then we've got a legendary broadcaster to follow.
Yeah, Jim Hughson going to join us. So Jim was going to be our one of our guests on our first show of the year, episode 1 of season 2. Something came up last minute, but boy, oh boy, we're excited to bring him in. Recently retired, which is a bit of a heartbreaker for me, but we're going to go over him and all his all the amazing stuff he's done in his career. I've done a deep dive, as I like to do, and
as you always do.
A ton of interesting stuff to know about Jim Hughson. A lot of stuff I was surprised about. I gotta say, Ken, in digging into this, when I go and I dig behind the scenes and find sources, and one of the, some of the sources I was talking to, it was one of those times that it seemed like some of the sources I had, I was digging and I wasn't getting much, and I was like, this isn't really going anywhere. And then all of a sudden you kind of like broke through, and then all the good stuff came flying out. There's a lot of really good stuff having to do with Jim Hughson. He's got a great story, as most phenomenal broadcasters do. And when you're talking about phenomenal broadcasters, he's the guy. I mean, like, for me, Ken, I don't know about you. For me, he's kind of the voice of my generation. And one of the things that we'll ask him about that really cemented that is, like, I think our generation is maybe right on the cusp of being the first video game generation, like the first generation of hockey fans that were really kind of inundated in the game, not just from watching it on TV, but from actually being the first kind of generation to like hop on the joystick and play as Wayne Gretzky or Jeremy Roenick in, 94 EA Sports. And when you're talking about the original OGs that we are, well, Jim Hughson is the original OG when it comes to voicing those games. I have pestered him, Ken, time and time again in the times I've worked with him in the bar afterwards, asking him about this. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to it. He knows that, so it's going to be great to get into it with him. But let's just start off, Ken. How are you doing, my friend?
Tremendous. And since you mentioned video games, I always like to date myself. I'm a few years older than you, but my first computer, my friend Tim Clausen had an Intellivision, and our big purchase at the Weeb household was the Colecovision, which was very cutting edge at the time. I didn't play a lot of hockey on it, but played a lot of baseball on it. So love those video days. But yeah, man, I mean, when I was playing junior hockey in Winkler in the Manitoba Junior Hockey League, one of my closest friends, Mike Dick, had the EA Sports, and we played a lot of hockey in the basement, after practices, after games, and getting prepared for it. So definitely love that part of life. I'm not a gamer like Patrik Laine is anymore, but certainly enjoyed those days. At the joystick, as you mentioned.
Well, I remember at the Lactabani Senior School, when you got to grade 12, there was like the grad lounge. And we had set up, for the first time ever, we were the first class to do it, but we set up an old school Sega Genesis, and I graduated.
Oh, even better, yes.
But we had 94 because like to me, 93 and 94 were the 2 years. And, you had those little kind of cheat codes you built in there. Jeremy Roenick was phenomenal in those games, but you'd take the puck down into the corner and go straight across the front of the net, and the goalie just could not stop it unless you figured out to put the goalie in manual mode. You could follow it. But a couple of years later, right around the time I graduated, or a couple of years afterwards, Jim Hughson came out with the voice on that. And I can tell you, Ken, it felt like, first of all, when you first started playing video hockey and you got to play as those guys, it was amazing. But when you had Jim Hughson doing, like, commentating on the moves you were making in the game, my God, that was, to me, like, you're talking about steps up in the gaming industry, and like a lot of times it has to do with the graphics and the bit count and all of this kind of stuff. That was a step up in the hockey playing experience that they've been trying to replicate ever since. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. But before we get to Jim, we've got a great time here with Aaron Portzline, because we've got so much to talk about with what Pierre Luc Dubois is doing. So let's bring him into the show. Hey, Ken, talking about original OGs, Aaron Portzline, the first guest we ever had on this show, although only you and I know it, because, again, to reiterate, I forgot to press live on the podcast, and we did not record what was a phenomenal first episode of Kenny and Renny, but he's back. No one has been on the Kenny and Renny show more than Aaron Portzline. We're so happy to have him. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing great. I just hope we can replicate the one program that nobody will ever see.
It was amazing. It was a masterpiece.
It was
a masterpiece. Let's hit it. Let's do it again, Aaron.
Yes.
I was going to say, any video game stories from your childhood, Aaron, that you need to share after we've shared about Colecovision and Intellivision. And we should have also mentioned I love the Nintendo, where the little short and wide guy could take the best slap shot you've ever seen.
Well, just a few things spring to mind. I played NHL, I think it was 96, Sega Genesis. And I played it way, way, way too much. I think that's the one where if you hit a guy hard enough, he would literally bleed on the ice. Is that?
There's a couple of them. There's a couple of them. Yeah,
that was unfortunate. Yeah. I also, when I was quite young, there were these handheld games called head-to-head, where you would hold. I mean, it wasn't very big. It was like the size of a big cell phone. You would hold one end of it. You could play football, basketball, and the guy on the other end holding his side was literally playing against you on this little screen. Yay big. And we had head-to-head hockey, which was basically you were just on the power play constantly in this game, and it was fantastic. We'd laugh at it now, but I played that. I went through a lot of 9-volt batteries playing that sucker.
That's phenomenal. Aaron, you're down in Arizona right now, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Ken and I just had lunch, and we were talking about it, and we can't remember who said it, but there's a sports scribe who suggested that this Arizona team is the worst hockey team he's ever seen in his years covering it. Is that what you're expecting to cover in your time there?
Well, put it this way. I've been wondering this since the start of the season, because they opened up in Columbus. The first game was in Columbus. The Blue Jackets, you're worried could they score this year. They beat them 8-2 on opening night. Yeah. And I remember thinking, who is going to win more games this season, the Coyotes or the Cardinals? Which Arizona team? That's become a more poignant question.
Wow!
As we've gone along, I'm not sure where I go there. I think the football team's 7-2. The Coyotes have 2 wins. It might be the Cardinals, but we'll see.
Especially the way Kyler Murray's been playing, that's for sure. Aaron, before we get into the season, obviously tragedy struck the Blue Jackets in the off season. I mean, what was it like to see the team come together after that? And also I'm curious from a writing perspective, what's it like to cover a story of that magnitude in the off season?
Yeah, well, it was gut wrenching in all ways. I mean, just the way you get a couple of texts overnight from Latvia saying Matisse Kivlenieks is gone, and you're going, what do you mean gone? Like, what's getting lost in translation here? You realize the horror of that situation in Michigan. Obviously, above all, the young man lost his life. His friend witnessed it. His goaltending coach witnessed it. In fact, Elvis Merzlikins was tasked with telling his mother that he had passed away, because no one with the police department in Michigan could speak Latvian. Nobody could communicate this to her. The poor woman's driving her way to work in the morning and gets that phone call from Elvis. And it's just so much about it that's just devastating in so many ways. Honestly, covering it reminded me of another really unfortunate story in Columbus many years ago. The young girl, 12-year-old Brittany Cecil, struck by a puck in the stands and killed. That's why rinks all over the world now have nets on both sides. It just had that kind of just gut-wrenching, just dreadful, absolutely dreadful. We often say platitudes about those who have passed. He was, and I don't claim to have known Matiss Kivlenieks well. He was a part-time NHL player, but he was around a lot, and he is what everyone said about him. He was always smiling. Even if you didn't know him, he was always smiling. Was a bright prospect. He probably would have been the backup goalie this year to Kivlenieks. They probably would have moved Korpisalo, or Kivlenieks may have been picked up by Seattle in the expansion draft. So much about it's just devastating. He stayed in the U.S. He was going to head back to Latvia for the summer. He stayed behind because he wanted to see what 4th of July was like in this country. Just so many things about it that are just absolutely devastating. And they've done their best to handle it with great class and grace and dignity. His family was here on opening night. An incredible standing ovation from the crowd. Incredibly emotional seeing Boone Jenner, this very stoic, reserved hockey player, hug his Matiss's stepdaughter or sister, after the face-off. This big burly hockey player leaning in for an embrace with this small, frail, sad young child. Just a devastating story, and so much of what they do this season. Elvis is a super emotional kid anyways. Everything he's doing this season has the backdrop of number 80 behind it. Matiss Kivlenieks is a good friend. So it's still a very present story for many people.
Aaron, you dug into it pretty well there. I'm just going to ask you to dig into it just a touch deeper, because I think from the outside, we took a look at Matiss Kivlenieks, and a lot of us, like you'd said, he was a fringe NHLer at the time. I know his future was bright, but outside of Columbus, a lot of people didn't know this kid. But you take a guy like Pierre Luc Dubois, who switches his number to honor him, and hadn't played with him for a year, and you could feel from the outside how much this hit all the people involved in the organization, even though he, from the outside, it looked like he wasn't a guy who was as involved in the organization as he was. But give me an idea what you think it was about him that in the time that he had there, he sewed himself into the fabric of the Columbus Blue Jackets hockey organization the way that he did.
Yeah, well, there's, with so many of these guys that we're fortunate to cover, there is a strong sense of humility. And Matiss had that for sure. He was, as I said earlier, was literally always smiling. You learn a lot about these guys sometimes by how their teammates react to their successes and their struggles. And when he made his debut in Madison Square Garden and beat the Rangers, of course everyone's happy. It's a win over the Rangers in the Garden. But the level of just pure joy for him was off the charts. The night that his death became known, the Lightning and the Canadiens played each other in playoff games, and rinks around the league announced the news and had a moment of silence before the game. And it's hard to watch David Savard in that instance, who is really having a hard time keeping it together during the moment of silence. Josh Anderson having a hard time keeping it together. There's a sadness about his youth, of course, that makes it so much harder. The untimeliness of this. It's never a good time for something like this to happen. But someone who's so young and coming into their life, it makes it so much more hard to understand. The one thing that maybe we don't appreciate enough in North America, or at least in this side of the border, this country doesn't get really super excited about the World Championships. And I've looked at it from the perspective of Kivlenieks hadn't had his shining moment yet. He was still working towards his goal. And yet, just not too long before that his passing, he was Latvia's goaltender when they beat Canada in the World Championships.
Mm-hmm.
And that country went crazy, as you can imagine they would have. They'd never beaten Canada before. And so, you think, geez, he did. There's nothing you can say that makes his loss not devastating. He got his crowning moment with his countrymen, something I'm sure he never dreamed possible. He did have that moment. If you are a goaltender from Latvia and that is your crowning moment in your career, you've had one hell of a career.
Yeah.
And he did get to savor that.
No doubt. Aaron, what went through your mind when you saw Pierre Luc Dubois change his number, and then the reaction he had about, I'm basically borrowing his number. It's not my number.
Yeah, I mean, some of these guys have such emotional and personal ways of coming to grips with it. It's a beautiful act by Pierre. Elvis has said, I'm going to win the Vezina Trophy, and he's going to help me. Like I said, the legacy of the young man is alive with a lot of people. Think back to last year, there were extra goalies around on all teams. He was around quite a bit, even though he was taxi squad and not playing. But one of the more beloved guys in that room. Obviously, everybody brings a little bit something. I think people really admired and appreciated the way he carried himself and the way that he went about his work, the way that he handled himself in what's not always an easy situation, especially in a year when you're not getting to play as much as you wanted to play.
Speaking of Pierre Luc Dubois, I don't know how much you've been able to see. Clearly, last year did not look like it was a year that was representative of Pierre Luc Dubois as a hockey player. Boy, oh boy, if what we've seen so far from him this season is representative of what he is as a hockey player, Winnipeg Jets fans are lucky. But I'm wondering if you can give me your idea of the contrast you've seen from the player last year to the player that we are starting to see this season, and which one is kind of the one that you expected, or if maybe you were surprised by both.
Well, I was surprised by last year. You know what? I think as we get further away from last season, we're going to recognize just how much of an aberration that season was for a lot of guys, and what a strange year it was just in general, and how some guys maybe thrive in that setting, and some guys it's just, coming to a new team is a huge transition for people anyways. What about when you go to a new team where you can't really mingle with the guys and cohabitate and have the same experiences you're used to having? I think, and I don't pretend to know Pierre Luc really well, know him a little bit, I think he takes stuff very personally. I think he's a very emotional kid, and I would suspect that what happened last year was really hard for him, to be in that spot. So I'm not surprised at all that he's playing dramatically better, and I think this is who the player is. He is I said at the time when he was traded, this is not a guy that's going to blow you away with puck skills and dangles, but he is a skilled, big, heavy, competitive ramrod of a hockey player. Just wears people down, overwhelms people. And that's why Columbus, the last thing Jarmo Kekalainen wanted to do was to trade this guy. It's the last thing they wanted to do. He was their number one center. He was the guy that they drafted maybe a spot or two higher than anybody thought they should have. They got him right. They got it right. And to see it go down like it did, that was the last thing that they wanted to do. Not surprised. This is an all-star player. For sure. It's a difference maker. Wait till you see him at his prime in the postseason, where that's where it really wears on you, where if you're the opposing centerman, it's not just a one night and one off. Here's this guy again. It's the matchup that you can't get away from, because he doesn't get any smaller, doesn't get any softer. It doesn't get any easier. It just gets harder from game 1 through game 5, 6, however long you can take it. It's a problem, and he's even more effective in the postseason than he is in the regular season.
Oh, we saw it again Tuesday night, Aaron. I mean, going up against the greatest player in the game, Connor McDavid was frustrated at 5-on-5, and to see Pierre Luc's face light up when I asked him what he thought when Paul Maurice told him, "Hey man, this is your job tonight," his face just absolutely lit up. I mean, I wrote about it. I said, this is not an assignment that a lot of people are welcoming, right? I mean, you can end up on the wrong side of the highlight reel pretty quickly when you're going head-to-head there. I'm curious, we're both going to be writing about it. Sean's going to be there for hockey, covering it. We're all going to be telling the story. What do you think it's going to mean to him? I mean, we're fortunately all going to be there to see it personally. What do you think it's going to mean for Pierre Luc Dubois to come back to Nationwide Arena on Wednesday?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would suspect it'll be difficult for him. Again, because he's an emotional kid. I think he's a kid who feels a lot. I suspect it's going to be. I don't think it will be as toxic as an environment this year as it would have been last year when the feelings were so raw. But he's going to hear about it, right? And I don't know how that's going to affect him. It may send him the other direction. He may play the best game he's played all season because of it. My sense is it's, again, knowing him a little bit, and I don't pretend to know him well, my sense is it's a game he's probably looking forward to getting over with and getting on, and maybe the second game will be easier than, the next time they come back next year will be easier than this first one. I don't know how he's going to play, but my sense is it's going to be something he'll be happy to have in the rearview mirror in the days after the game.
You know what? This just popped into my head, and I don't know how much insight you'd have into this, but we did an interesting story on Hockey Night in Canada, where he had talked about the idea that Evgeny Svechnikov, who he was on a line with for much of this season, was a line mate of his in the junior ranks. And he had another Russian, Lazarev, I think was his name, another Russian line mate at that time, then graduates to the NHL and has Panarin that he plays with as well. And he kind of joked about, he said he wouldn't call it the Russian way, but he definitely learned a different way of playing hockey from those players. Now, I take a look at Panarin and Pierre Luc Dubois and think those are two very different types of players. But I wonder, from what you saw, what effect a player like Panarin may have had on Pierre Luc Dubois and his game and his development.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I think Panarin affected a ton of people here in Columbus just in his 2 years here. I think the effect that he had on Dubois, and it may have been part of the transition for him last season, is Panarin, he didn't play center on that line. He was clearly the left winger, but he carried the puck up the ice, allowed Dubois to be the net front heavy guy and not lug the puck up the ice. That was what Panarin loved to do and could weave through anybody and to do it. So when Panarin left, we wondered in Columbus, what is it going to look like when Dubois now, as the centerman, is charged with perhaps more transporting of the puck up the ice, and how big of an adjustment is that going to be? Well, that story became a secondary story because it just blew up so fast. I mean, it was before the start of the season. We learned he asked for a trade. That became kaboom, and I think, what was it, 3 games? Something short. But so you wonder what the adjustment would be. Panarin affected so many guys here. Oliver Bjorkstrand's talked about it at length. Just so competitive, even for his size, the fearlessness. And of course, Pierre is not going to be outsized by many of the people he's in a puck battle with. He's got that advantage. You put that size and strength with a work ethic and a fearlessness like Panarin has, and my God, you can overwhelm games. I mean, you can just take them over. So I know John Tortorella spent a lot of time just pointing guys to Panarin. Do that. There's some things you can't do, of course, but there are a lot of things you can do that he does. Just never quitting on a puck and always going hard. I think that transcended the lineup for a while. He showed the way for a lot of guys.
Unfortunately, one of the other headliners in the deal, Aaron, will not be available on Wednesday for the game. But how would you describe the start of the year for Patrick Laine after what, much like Pierre Luc Dubois, was a very difficult transition for him after the deal?
I tell you what, guys, it has been incredible. It has been incredible. Even last year, you had to keep reminding yourself, almost going back and looking at film of Patrick Laine at his best. This is what he can be, because the player that was before us on the ice was just nowhere near that in any way. It was astounding. And you wondered this summer, just where is this going with Laine? He's due his $7.5 million qualifying offer. Of course they're going to qualify him, but where does it go with him? Is he moved this summer? And you know what? I think there were guys in the room that were quite okay with him being moved, to be honest with you. And instead they moved some other guys out. The culture change this summer has been dramatic, and he's been a big part of it. Tortorella's voice is not there anymore, of course. Some veterans have been moved out. They've turned it over to some younger guys, but Patrick Laine, from the start of training camp, I mean, he back-checked in a preseason game, and my Twitter feed just started, going, bonk. Did I just see Patrick Laine back-check? Who's wearing Patrick Laine's sweater tonight? Yada, people having a good time with this. Who is this guy? He has been a noticeably different guy, and the guys in the room say that it started off season and in the room as well, that he's been a different player for them, a different teammate for them as well. He's been one of the best players on this team, a point a game guy, and it was a bit of a kick when he went down with an oblique injury. It's been a couple weeks now. He's probably going to be out at least a couple more. He's been a really good player for them.
I don't want to walk away from Laine too quickly, but I do want to ask about Jack Rarozovic and see. I think one of the interesting parts about this is last season, everyone looked at it as the Pierre Luc Dubois Patrick Laine trade, and both players kind of went and underperformed in each of their markets. But the crown piece of the trade, if you take a look at the results from last year, was Jack Rarozovic, who just got off to a phenomenal start and had a great year. I haven't seen a lot of Columbus games so far this season, but I don't see a lot of Jack Rarozovic in the scoring sheets. What are you seeing from him this year?
Well, he has been a bit of a lost soul here, and it's surprising. If you told me that through 13 games Rarozovic would not have scored and the Blue Jackets are 8-5, I'm not sure I would have believed you. He has fallen into a fourth line role on a line that's really not a fourth line type of line. So it's a couple of shifts a period for Jack. He's pretty much disappeared here, and he's noticeable at times because, as you know, the guy can really wheel and deal. But he has not really been a part of this so far. It's shocking. He's down to like 12 minutes a night. He was tied for second on this team in scoring last year. Came into training camp thinking that most likely to play between Laine and Voracek on the top line was going to be Rarozovic. And yet here we are a month into the season. He's the only centerman on the roster who hasn't even given a shot there. Not at any point during camp, at any point during the preseason, none of these games. And essentially there appear to be trust issues between the coach, Brad Larson, and Jack Rarozovic. And Mike Sillinger's kid, Cole Sillinger, how old are we, guys? Has moved up. He's the number one center. Boone Jenner's the number two center. And Sean Corrali, who they signed to be the third or fourth line guy from a Boston local, kid comes back to Columbus. He's been the third line center for probably 2 weeks now. And Rarozovic is playing a couple games. He's been under 10 minutes. So he's said a couple times, I don't control my ice time. That's up to the coach. I just work here.
Heard that before.
Yeah. Used the same line in Winnipeg, which I thought was extremely concerning. But anyways, go on.
Yeah, I think that's I'm not sure if he means the line to sound as it does.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a I don't think it, especially when it's your hometown. I don't think it's a line that maybe those above him enjoy hearing much. Maybe they're waiting for him to take a stand and make a real push for the ice time. But he's kind of a bit player at this point.
Strange development for sure. A quick one, Aaron. You touched on the coaching staff. Obviously, folks around here are very familiar with Pascal Vincent. What has he brought to the staff? And especially he was brought in to work on the power play a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's such an important guy here because they're so young. They have on their first line. They have an 18-year-old centerman and a 20-year-old left winger with Jake Voracek. So Pascal Vincent is in charge of a very young forward core. I think the players here really like his ideas, his fresh perspective, his energy, his passion. He's a very passionate man. And he's in charge of the power play, too, which has been pretty good. Jake Voracek is kind of the coach on the ice for the power play. You can hear him barking out signals. You'll be able to hear it tonight in Arizona for sure. But Pascal Vincent is a guy. And I think he's a really important hire here, to be honest with you, because they're really young. Next year, Kent Johnson is going to be here. Kirill Marchenko is going to be here from Russia. The year after that, Voronkov is coming from Russia. This is going to be a very young team. They're kind of a rebuild on the fly mode right now. They need teachers in that spot, and he is a preeminent teacher in this league.
Aaron, I'm just going to go back to Dubois here. I want a bit of an outside perspective here, and I'll couch that by saying from a local perspective, I think the Winnipeg Jets have done an absolutely phenomenal job of getting players to lock in a community that most people thought that players would want to escape. They've got players like Ehlers and Scheifele and Wheeler and Kyle Connor, and the list goes on and on. Connor Hellebuck to
Morrissey.
Lock in long-term. Morrissey in this market time and time again. So I don't put anything past Kevin Cheveldayoff and his ability to lock in players long-term in this market. I wonder to you what Pierre Luc Dubois' contract negotiations, from what you know of the player, would look like going forward. The team has 2 years of control with him after this year. His contract or his qualifying offer will be a significant one. But do you see this being something that plays out, or do you see the Jets signing him long-term? And if they do, what does that number look like, given this is a 23, 24-year-old player who's on pace for a point per game season, who's phenomenally responsible defensively and a big, strong horse of a centerman? What does a number like that typically command?
Well, I mean, I wish I were his agent, put it that way. I mean, you're talking probably by the time that contract comes up, if he continues on this trajectory, we can safely assume he's a top 10 centerman in the league. Fair?
I thought if he keeps
trending that way for sure.
Right now, yes. The way he's playing right now, yes. Yeah.
So we're probably talking. I mean, for sure, it's 8 figures, right? It's for sure $10 million. Wouldn't we think?
So, yeah, and it's funny because we've got Rob Mahoney here chips in, and he says 8x8 Chevy will get it done. Well, I can see why people will think that, and there's been this mindset that Blake Wheeler makes 8.25, and I think there's this feeling that Kevin Cheveldayoff goes into a lot of conversations with players and says look, yeah, Blake Wheeler's the benchmark, but here's the other reasons why you should stay. And I do think that Kevin Cheveldayoff is very successful doing that. But this is why I wanted your perspective, because I think if you're looking at this from a global viewpoint and you're just simply an agent walking into that room with this player who does this, I think you're completely right. I don't think in a world where this player who's this young, this good defensively, this good offensively, this big, this strong, and this good of a kid, that you don't pay that kid $10 million at least. Yeah. But that's why I wanted to go that direction. Do you think there's any kind of possibility, from what you know of him and what he went through, the troubles that he had in Columbus before he left, that the appreciation of being in a place like Winnipeg where he's having his success, that you can get that number down from there?
I mean, that's a tricky one for me, because you'd have to know how he truly, genuinely feels about Winnipeg. I never got the sense from him, as you do some guys, that the dream is LA or the dream is, an exotic locale. Nothing against Winnipeg. I think Winnipeg and Columbus people can speak about this without having to apologize for some of the things they said. Because we all have had the same things said about it. But yeah, I don't know that he has a dream destination in mind. He may love playing in a Canadian market where there's just so much import on every game. But I also think that players like that, again, if he continues to ascend, this is a centerman we're talking about. This is a difference-making, elite-level player. The PA gets involved in these things too a little bit, right? Like, yeah, it's cute that you want to do this, but really the market is here for you. And he wasn't drafted by Winnipeg, so this, I'm not sure that there's an emotional tie to that, since it's a second club. Tough for me to say, but if I'm taking 8x8 and I'm a top 10 centerman in the league, which I suspect he's on his way to being, that seems like you're leaving money on the table to me.
Oh boy,
money on the table.
Yeah. So interesting, right? Because those are the numbers that were being thrown around for the Columbus extension. But again, that's going to be 2 years prior, right? I mean, for me, I'm totally with where Aaron is coming from. The only thing would be concerned about if I were a player and an agent in that situation is what the impact of COVID is going to be having on that number. Does that reduce 10 to whether that's 9 or whatever? That'd be what I'm just wondering what the market appeal or ability of the market to be paying that number is, and that's what's going to make this offseason fascinating, because it's going to be a big number.
I think the interesting part of this is, like, you take a look at what the defenseman market went to this last year and exploded. Like, COVID didn't hold that number down. And I just think, I mean, when's the last time, a guy like Pierre Luc Dubois became available? I know we're 2 years away from that. And I know, again, I will put nothing past Kevin Cheveldayoff and his ability to convince guys that a very bright future of playing hockey exists here, because I think it does. But boy, oh boy, like what if you just take a look at the numbers, like the numbers he's putting up, his age, all of that, I'll go through that list again. It's pretty hard to say that he doesn't tick every single box that you want in a player, and that's not worth the money that you would pay for that. And
you just can't find those guys.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even a matter of picking high every year. There are years where those guys just aren't there, no matter how high you pick.
Yeah.
Like, number one centers, I think people in Columbus know this as well as anybody. It's really hard. And Winnipeg and Columbus and markets like this, you're drafting them. That's how you're getting them. You're drafting them. So you better not let them go.
Yeah. Aaron, awesome to have you on again. Third time is the charm, although the second time was the charm. The first time definitely wasn't the charm because we forgot to record it. But
who forgot to record? We as a group forgot to record it.
Okay, Ken, I forgot to record it. I'll take the hit on that one.
No, we're a team. We're a team, Sean.
Aaron, great to have you as usual. Thanks for the insight. I know our audience appreciates it. I know you educated me on Pierre Luc Dubois, and we've been covering him for a while here today. It's great to have your perspective. We appreciate it. Awesome. Are really looking forward to seeing you next Wednesday. It's nice to put some of these COVID things behind us.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe we can grab a drink or something like that. It'll be great to see you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks guys for having me. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Have a great day, my friend.
See you later.
All right, and let's jump right into it. We're going to bring Jim Hughson into the show here. I know our audience, Jim, has been waiting for this for a while. There was a couple comments in our comment section. Couple comments earlier of people who were saying it's about time. We wanted to dig in and kind of tell your story, and I've done some background research into yours. Your call, I've always thought, is just an absolutely phenomenal call. And I love talking to broadcasters about how they arrive on that call and digging into you. I think I've got an idea of one of the things that colored it. You have a background in drama, do you not?
Without question. I should have been on stage. To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows. I was, that's what I thought I was going to do. And then I found out a lot of other people were going to do that too, and it was a little hard to make money at that. So I refined my decision and went a different direction. But I still ended up on the stage.
Well,
just a stage that I thought I would be on.
A pretty big stage. Give us a little bit of background. Like I think that in high school you may have done some Shakespeare. You were going to go into. I mean, you've touched on it, but you were going to university to study acting as a craft.
I did actually. I was in a small town. As you know, it's like trail going to the Living World Series. It's the things that happen in North Surrey where they have teams go to the World Series. You have to have an individual in a community that is dedicated to a particular craft and steers you in the right direction. In northern British Columbia, in Fort St. John, we had a man named Jim Hoffman, who was not only our English teacher, but he was really into the theater and drama. And he convinced quite a number of us to form the theater department. And in a small town, like we were a small group, and we were together for quite a number of years, from grade 8 through grade 12. We did some, what I would say now, I don't know that I want to see them these days, but we did what I thought were some fantastic shows. And because of him and because of that, we did Shakespeare, we did Ibsen, we did a number of really cool things. And because of that, by the time I got to grade 11 and 12, I was the only person in the theater department. He created a department within the high school. So writing and directing 11 and 12 was me. Theater 12 was me. I was the only person in the class. But as it turns out, I got scholarships to go off to the University of Victoria and join their theater department, and it was wonderful, except that I found very quickly that it didn't pay particularly well. University was not making me a lot of money, and I had a job at a radio station, and I turned my back on it and went back into the radio business. And when I did, I had to drive by my parents' place, leave Vancouver Island, and go back up north where I was going to go to work. And speaking of turning your back, my mother took my graduation picture and turned it around to face the wall.
No,
and that was the only displeasure that she voiced, that I had packed it in at university and gone back to work. So that's, I was going to be in Hollywood. That's where it was going to be, but it didn't quite work out that way.
Wow. Jim, I love that you talked about Shakespeare. That story resonates with me because my high school English teacher, Peter Hildebrand, he also taught me how to throw a curveball when I was 12 or 13 years old. So when he was standing on the desk doing Shakespeare, I listened to him a little bit more emphatically than I might have otherwise. But where does the love for radio come from? Like you said, so when you made that decision, I mean, what kind of led you along that path?
Well, and realistically, if I'm very truthful, and I should be about that, the truth of the matter was $400 a month. I could make some money. That's what I was up to. I quite liked the radio business, though. I did enjoy it. During the time that we were doing all of these plays, and I was in the theater department, we would go up to the local radio station on Sunday afternoons, and gave us a half-hour block, and we did radio plays. So I don't know whoever listened to them. I have never spoken to anyone in the world who ever heard them, but we thought it was pretty cool, the group of us that put them together. So while I was there, the guy who was a neighbor, like it's a small town, 6,000 people, Fort St. John at that time, and Gene Daniel was the guy who ran the radio station, and he I knew him, and he pulled me aside and said, "You want a part-time job at the radio station?" And I liked it. I was reading news, reading sports, I was doing everything, and I was making a little money. And so that was the attraction. The radio, it was fun. And especially in a small town, you get to do everything. Like I had a sales route. I was a DJ. I broadcast hockey games. I broadcast fastball games. Got a chance to do just about it, and did the 6 o'clock news. So yeah, I really quite like the radio business, but honestly, when I started to move from the north and move from that small community to other places, it was all about trying to make $50 more a month. That's all. I'd have gone, I'd have been a gardener if they'd have offered me $50 more a month to move to another city at that point. That's where it was at.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the radio station you got your start at was CKNL. Is that correct?
Northern Lights Broadcasting, Fort St. John.
There we go. So CKNL. Now, I hear that the first hockey game you ever called was a Fort St. John's Flyers senior hockey game. Now, you touched on this a little bit, but I kind of wonder if this is a chicken before the egg before the chicken kind of thing. But did you just get thrown into calling a hockey game and kind of decide from there that was something you were interested, or was that something, was calling hockey one of the reasons you were in that radio station?
No, I had nothing to do with it. But I wasn't, I played hockey, so I played all my life, and I played on the junior team at Fort St. John. And, I thought I was fairly proficient at it. There was only one thing that separated me from being a professional hockey player: fear. I was the fastest skater on the team and didn't need shoulder pads. Figure that out. In small town radio stations, this is very typical. People are really transient. And so the guy who was the sports director, and that's a fancy title, but there's only one guy in the sports department in the radio station, got a job in a different city. And he moved off. And I kind of thought, it turned out that I was the only guy left in the radio station who knew a puck from a football. And so I got to be the sports director. But I had grown up. I mean, those were the halcyon days of senior hockey. So you think about the early part of the 60s when there were 6 National Hockey League teams. I think there were only 6 American Hockey League teams at that point, but there were a lot of really good hockey players who had played in those leagues and just couldn't hang on. But they took jobs and they played in the senior leagues across Canada. And in British Columbia, there were some fantastic leagues, including the South Peace Hockey League, which included Fort St. John and Dawson Creek. And those games were bigger than life. We had season tickets when I was a kid on the blue line, no glass, chicken wire on the end, but nothing on the blue line where we sat. And those players were bigger than life to me. And we only had one channel of television, and it wasn't really good. So we never missed a game. We were at every Fort St. John Flyer game, and those guys were my heroes. Like Jimmy Anderson, the greatest right winger in the history of the South Peace Hockey League, is the favorite player I've ever watched in my life. So when it came to broadcasting a game, and somebody sent me to do the Fort St. John Flyers and Dawson Creek Canucks, I was thrilled. This was big time for me. That was the first game that I'd ever broadcast, and I'd never broadcast a hockey game in my life. But I knew the game. I'd grown up around the game, so I kind of bluffed my way through it and blundered my way through it. I loved, actually. That's one tape I wouldn't burn. I'd love to hear that and find out just what that sounded like, because I was still a teenager, and it was just a really cool opportunity. But it did turn a light on, and the next job that I got was in play-by-play. I moved to Penticton. That's where and then I started the nomadic radio television life that many of us have lived.
Love that story, Jimmy. I mean, I was fortunate when I was at University of Regina doing journalism. I played the first 2 years of college hockey, but the third year I got cut. But that year, because I loved hockey and I wanted to do play-by-play at that time too, I got to do the play-by-play at the Allen Cup in Lloydminster for the Regina team. And man, I know what you mean. I'd love to. I have that cassette tape somewhere. One day I'm gonna put it back in. I'm sure it didn't sound as good as yours did, but I just love that about being in the booth. What is it that you love about being in the booth? And when that light went on, what was that like for you to know this is kind of what I want to chase this dream now?
Well, I never really chased that dream until it's quite a few years later before I decided, well, this is life for me. I moved around a little bit. I did my obligatory backpack trip of Europe. I went out to Brandon, Manitoba. When CKLQ was the name of the radio station, they started a new radio station there, and I knew the people who ran it. So I hung out there for a little bit, and it wasn't until I got to Vancouver and was offered a job at CKNW and bluffed my way somehow into being Jim Robson's backup, so that when he did television games, I got to do the radio games. That's when the light really came on, Ken, and it said, this is pretty cool. There were a lot of things about it. I passionately love the game of hockey. I was still on the stage. It's a performance, and I've always kind of been there. I've always felt really comfortable with that and felt really rewarded by that. But also, it's very practical. I thought, okay, hockey, you can work all winter and have the summer off. And I've always been a work to live guy as opposed to live to work, and that worked for me. And so that's when the light really came on, that I thought, I can do this, and I've had enough experience at it that if I grind it out and if I really work at this, I get a shot to have a full-time job.
Jim, it's interesting because I wanted to ask you that question earlier about calling that St. John's Flyers game and see if that's what lit the fire in you, if it was just a straight line after that. Clearly, it wasn't a straight line. You went in a lot of different directions. But when you came back to it, that line that you just used about living to work and kind of finding the passion that you had for it, I'm interested in your approach to preparation. I heard stories about you and just immense hunger you have for spending time to prepare. I've heard about you being at family events in the summertime and being nose in the books, preparing for your job coming up months away. Give me an idea of your process and maybe where that process comes from or where you learned that from.
Probably a lot of, I would say, to the latter part of your question, John, would be I learned preparation from Jim Robson, who was never a mentor to me in the sense that he was a teacher, but what he did was he allowed me into his world and allowed me to look over his shoulder, allowed me to watch how he went about his day and how he went about his preparation. And he was so meticulous and he never made mistakes. And so I really appreciated that. And then I've always felt, and it's a bit extreme. I've always felt in the off season that you can't completely discard the game. You can't just completely wipe it out. But even in on a summer day before at the lake or wherever we are, I would always make sure that I'd be up before everybody else and spend an hour or two reading all the clips and just staying on top of it. Because it's a heck of a lot easier to stay on top of it if you do that than to try and catch up. So that's all that was. But I've always felt too that if you're going to be at the top of the profession, you better know what you're watching. So for years and years and years, for me, especially on the West Coast, it's into your office at 4:00 in the afternoon and there's 2 games to watch. Because I felt like now it's a little different because I'm retired and now I can surf all over the place and I could care less. If the game's no good, I go to the other one, or I click over here, click over there, click over there, and watch a little bit of everything, but a whole lot of nothing. But I sort of trained myself to know the teams that I needed to see and make sure that I saw all the teams in the league. And I picked games. So into my office at 4:00 in the afternoon to watch 2 games, but specifically to know what they were doing, how they were playing, what they were doing on the power play, how they were doing their penalty kill, different things like that. And it just really helped me learn the game over the years, and it helped me keep my focus on the team. So you get to Saturday night and you're doing a game, or even if whatever night of the week it is, if you paid attention to the teams, then nothing surprises you. Then or if something does surprise you in the middle of the game when a coach does something, then it's different. He's trying something new. I haven't seen this. He's got the lines are changed, the power play has changed, the penalty kills changed. So the only way you can figure that out is to spend the time, and it's not such a bad way to spend any time, just watching hockey games. And largely that's been my preparation over the years, is spending hours and hours of watching. And I've always felt that, just like the players always say, the better you get, at the game, the more it slows down for you. And I don't think it's any different for broadcasters. If you understand what you're watching, and if you've paid attention, if you've done your homework, the game slows down for you, and you see things that you can send to an audience, you can talk to an audience about, and be pretty assured that you're right about it. An old football player once told me, and this is words that I've lived by forever. Football players usually play on the weekends, right? So he said, if I do my work all week long, the game is recreation. I've always felt that. So Saturday for me was recreation. If I had done my work all week long and I sat in that chair and knew the teams that I was watching, that's recreation. It's fun.
It's a great line.
It's just like Dom Ducharme, Sean, right? In the when you study for the test, why would you be nervous for the exam? You've done all the work, right? I mean, the exam is the fun part. I mean, it's a little bit more fun.
You can't be nervous for it, though.
That's true.
Still, be on edge and one of the crazy things about hockey is it's such a frenetic, crazy game that you can be completely and utterly prepared and know both teams really well and have a really good idea what's coming. And within 30 seconds, everything changes. It's just, that's the beauty of the game. And then you have improvise. And, then it's a night at the improv. You're trying to figure out what's going on and trying to catch up because somebody got hurt in the 29-second mark or somebody scored a goal. And it's beautiful in that way. But I still think that, if you've done your homework, you're prepared and know the teams, then you know how the screws are going to turn in each dressing room and what might happen.
Very cool. Jim, obviously I love baseball almost as much as I love hockey. You've shared your passion for hockey with us. How about baseball? Where did the passion for that come from? And I mean, for me, Saturday afternoon at my grandma's listening to Dave Van Horn on CBC. I mean, that was something for me that was cool. And then to get to listen to you after that was very cool also. What was that experience of your life like, and how did it come to be?
Well, it's interesting. I was always a fan. I always say that, Ken, I just like watching live sports. I'd watch Tiddlywinks if I didn't know the result. It's cool. And I like you, I spent my Saturday afternoons, I would never miss NBC's baseball with Vin Scully and Joe Garagiola. I just thought it was really cool. It was time well spent for me. And so it was an interesting time. I was working at TSN, and it was the late 80s, and I was doing hockey, and I had a really good job, but I knew that they had Expos games, and I thought, why not me? Why should I broadcast them? But I had to convince some people because just because I'd never broadcasted a ball game before, there were people who thought that I'd never seen a ball game before. And so I had to convince them. I had to go through a series of rehearsals and, test patterns and all of that sort of stuff. But anyway, they were kind enough to give me an opportunity to broadcast the Expo games in the late 80s. And it was fantastic because it was such a good team. I don't know if you would recall who was on that team. They were building towards 94 when they probably should have won, and then the league shut down and they didn't win. But they were really good then in the late 80s. And they had such good guys on their team. Buck Rogers was the manager, and he was just a wonderful big bear of a man who took me under his wing and taught me a whole bunch of things. Kenny Singleton was my partner. He's just a wonderful guy. But the guys on the team, from Tim Wallach to Hubie Brooks to Larry Walker, and a list goes on. Really good guys. They were such a good team, and I loved it. So I got an opportunity to do that. And then a couple of years later, they asked me if I wanted to move across to the American League and do the Blue Jay games. And how can you say no to that? I mean, the Blue Jays were climbing; they were going to be really good. But I was really sorry to leave the National League because I love the National League, and I love the National League West Coast trip. Like, there was no better trip than going to San Diego, Los Angeles and San Francisco and taking your family along. It was just, I mean, there's always a practical side to a lot of these jobs that we do, and a personal side to it. So anyway, they invited me over to do the Blue Jay games, and I joke to this day to Buck Martinez and Dan Schulman and guys like that in the years that I broadcast the Blue Jay games, I never broadcast a meaningless game. In baseball, that's amazing. People might not know that, but so many teams are out of it in July or August. So many teams are out of it in September. In the years that I did the Blue Jays, they won 2 championships, but in the other years, they were in it till the last day of the season. I didn't broadcast a meaningless Blue Jay game. And in baseball, that's remarkable. I had a blast doing it, learned a lot, and it was such wonderful theater because there were 4 million people watching the Blue Jays every time they played. It was fantastic.
I still have a hard time with that elephant symbol of the Oakland A's from back then because, boy, the Oakland A's drove me nuts before the Blue Jays finally got over the hump. Clearly, you had a partnership with Craig Simpson for a long time. You brought up Buck Martinez. I wonder for you what the trick that you found was from going from different, never mind from one sport to another, but from different color commentators to another. What is there part of your job that includes bringing out the best in those people in the chair beside you?
Friendship. Simple as that. Craig Simpson and I broadcast every game over dinner the night before we worked. We were always together. During the playoffs, even if we didn't want to spend time together, we ended up together. I'd go out for a walk in Boston in the middle of the playoffs, and we hadn't talked. Neither of us are phone talkers, and it's remarkable. We'd end up in the same place. We'd walk into the same place. We'd order the same thing for dinner, and just talk through the game. And so friendship is where it's at. And like if you like Buck Martinez is just a real pal, and the same with most of the people that I've worked with through my life. I felt. And you don't go out of your way because you can't do that. It's generic, right? You either are friends or you're not. But made really good friends with most of the people that I work with, and then it's really easy to pass the baton back and forth to have a discussion because you're doing it all the time anyway. It's not like we're just meeting at the rink for a game. We've been together, we talk together, we watch the same thing, we understand what we're watching. We know the teams, and we've spent time together. That to me is a really simple principle.
Sorry, Ken, I just wanted to jump in quick just to build on this point. But Jim, when you decided you were going to retire, how hard was that conversation with Craig?
You know what? If you're friends with people, they know it's coming.
Yeah, he could see it coming.
Oh, absolutely. He knew I was getting tired of being on the road. But it was that I had considered this. So there's no flashpoint there. And he was the recipient of the first call when I made the decision to let him know that I wasn't coming back. There are a few people in life that get an opportunity to do a dress rehearsal for retirement. That just doesn't work. It just never happens. But it happened for me because of COVID. We shut down for a year. I was not comfortable traveling during the last season. I just wasn't comfortable going out on the road and doing the things that I'd always done. And so I stayed at home, and I was good at it. I just felt really comfortable with it. And so when the summer came around and a fourth wave of COVID hit, and I knew there was going to be restrictions and protocols and all of that sort of stuff, I thought, the time is right. I've always really felt, and guys like Craig would verify this because everybody talks about it at some point over dinner, but I always felt like I would always know when it was time to step aside, and I always wanted to do it on my terms. I was lucky, very lucky enough to get both.
So interesting. Jim, what was it like to, deal with the, I wouldn't say the fallout, but the reaction? I mean, when you become the voice of hockey and people are counting on you Saturday nights, what was it like to, to do the interviews and to, it's not a funeral, but, this part of your life is over. I mean, people want to talk about it. They're asking you to kind of boil it down into a 5-minute interview. I mean, what was it like to kind of try to deal, jump in the time machine and try to piece it all together on those fronts?
It was really weird because I don't do me very well, so I had a little difficult time doing that. But it was funny the different reactions I got. Like the mailman who comes to my house every day and has for years and years said, "Down at the Canada Post place, we were really surprised, and we pretty much all decided you're coming back." Yeah, we're going to be coming back. The one thing about having a high-profile job, I'm just not working on the chain gang. When you have a high-profile job and they announce your retirement, it's pretty hard to come back now. So, that's good. Maybe that's a good thing. But no, you know what? There was a wonderful outpouring. So many friends and pals and people that I work with were mostly surprised. But anybody who knew me really closely wasn't particularly. But it was wonderful. And then I know how this works because our media works this way now. When your 24-hour news cycle is over, you're yesterday's man, and that's all cool. I was quite happy to be just Jim from down the block, and that's my life now, and I'm really quite happy with it. But it was wonderful that there were so many people that reached out. It was overwhelming, actually, for a few days that people accidentally found my email and text and phone number and talked to a lot of pals and a lot of friends, and it was very cool. And hopefully I'll talk to some of them again before now that the newsreel is finished.
Well, Jim, I refute the point that you're yesterday's news, because for people like me, you've been the voice of hockey for, the part of, the most impressionable part of my life going through hockey. I'm going to ask you a question, and your response may be, "Oh my God, here we go again," because I've cornered you in a bar with a beer 3 or 4 times and asked you this over and over again because I love this story. But for me, and I was talking about it earlier on the show, I don't know if you were watching, but Ken and I are kind of from the generation where we got to grow up watching hockey, but then all of a sudden these video games came out and we got to play as these guys. But there was this jump in the industry when all of a sudden the voice of hockey came in and was voicing what we were doing on the screen, and that was you for EA Sports. And I just remember I've talked with you time and time again about how when that video game came out, it just like my buddies and I, we didn't leave the basement for months because we just had you calling our games. I wanted you to just go through, the kind of story, because from what I've remembered from talking with you about this, I think you got into that thinking that it wasn't that big a deal, or maybe realizing kind of how you were maybe revolutionizing the industry.
Sean, I had no idea what I was getting into. So EA Sports is based near my home in Burnaby, British Columbia. So they called me up one day and asked me to do the initial voiceover. They'd never had any voiceover in the game. This is early 90s. So the first year, and I agreed, of course, and went into the sound booth. But the first year on that game, the amount of audio consisted of, "Welcome to Chicago Stadium for tonight's game between the Chicago Blackhawks and Detroit Wings." And that's all they had room for. Like, they didn't have space in the computer. They couldn't do anything more than that. The next year they came back to me and said, the IT people have come to us and said, "We can really expand this. We can do full play-by-play. How do we do this?" I said, "I don't know. How do we do this?" And nobody had ever done it before. And so I worked with these producers, and we just sort of blundered our way through this and tried to figure out how to do this, how to stitch lines together so they tried to form a sentence. And if you have like the first years of EA Sports, like probably about 94, I think was about the first year where we had full audio in there, the stitching wasn't great. Like, you could tell that it wasn't
Yeah.
a sentence. And so we looked at that, and year by year, we sort of worked at it and figured out ways to, finish a little phrase on an upbeat so that you could pick up the next phrase and it would form a sentence. And curiously, after a couple of years, they actually started to sound like sentences, and it started to sound like real play-by-play, which was really cool. In the meantime, the job was driving me crazy. It was the most tedious work I've ever done in my life. Like, you're in a phone booth in a basement in Burnaby, BC, rattling off all of these lines. If you think about it, like, you have to have a different intonation for the first period to the second period to the third period to overtime.
Wow.
It all has to be different. You can't do it. The first period can't sound like the third period because it's more exciting when it's tied in the third period. So we had to do everything multiple times.
Wow.
Then every name multiple times in low, it's, Pavelbury here, but then it has to be Pavelbury in the third period. It's just, and it went on and on and on. And I would sit in this booth and I'd go for hours and hours and hours until my head was ready to explode. And I'd just say, that's it. Got to stop for today. Can't do anymore. My voice is gone. Head's going to explode. I love the finished product, and it was really cool to be on the cutting edge of a platform like that, where basically we improvised our way through it and created what they were, the platforms that they work from today, because nobody had ever done it before. So that part was really cool, and the finished product was really cool. And many people have come to me and said, "Get the hell out of my house. I'm tired of listening to you all day. I hear you from my basement all day long. I don't want any more of that." But I was glad to surrender the chair to someone else after about 10 years, when I just thought, I just can't go in there and do that again.
Something else.
I think I still have some copies, though. Trouble finding a DVD player to put them in.
Jim, I wanted to ask you this because you talked about that moment when your mom took your graduation picture and turned it around to the wall. Symbolic gestures are meaningless unless the people making those gestures have meaning to us. And I go back to the very first Hockey Night in Canada game that I ever did was a couple months after my dad passed away. And I remember one of the things that happened right off the bat was you get all these messages from friends and family and people that you know, and so many of them were like, your dad would be so proud of you right now. I'm told that your mom passed away young and never really got to see you kind of achieve the heights of the heights that you achieved. But I also know that she was a columnist, and I'm wondering if something about what she did as a career caught your eye or shaped you, or just kind of the role that she played in you, and maybe the appreciation that you get of what she is in you has carried you to the top, even if she wasn't there to see it.
Interesting question. I'm glad you asked that, because nobody ever asks that. My mother died when I was in my early 20s. Never had an opportunity to listen or watch where I was going, but she was a columnist, and she was a war bride. And an educated English woman, and was very, very meticulous about the language, and especially the written word. But one of the things that's always been in the back of my mind is, as I would broadcast a game, to try and use the English language properly, because my mother might be listening somewhere, and she would have scolded me any night that I used words improperly, put sentences together improperly. And I know I have, and I use slang like everybody else, but that was ingrained in me from a very young age. Probably the reason I was the only subject in school other than drama that I was really good at was English. And that was because of my mother. But she was there, and my dad was just a cool hockey fan. He died very young as well, but he would have loved it. He sat and watched all the Blue Jay games, and we would talk after the games, and that was kind of cool. It was really cool to call your dad and say, "What do you think of the game tonight?" And he could care less about what I was doing during the game. He was always talking about the game, and that was cool too. Or you ask, how much money are you making now?
Jim, we've stolen more time from you than I asked for. I appreciate you sticking out with it. I just got to say, you touched on it earlier on the show, but going out on your own terms, you make it sound like it's easy to do in our industry. I have to say, I think there's a lot of examples. I don't think going out on your own terms and doing so with grace is easy to do in our industry. I admire you for doing it, even though I feel like, as a fan of yours and a colleague of yours, I feel like you could have gone on forever. And, regardless, I got to do one game with you, Jim, here in Winnipeg, and it was a big, fat check mark on my bucket list. And I want to thank you for the times I've been able to talk with you and working with you being such a highlight, and you showing up on the show here tonight just means a ton to Ken and I. Thank you so much for joining us. You were amazing.
I think the world of both your work, and very happy to be here because it doesn't happen very often anymore. So thanks a lot for having me on your show.
Yeah, I loved it, Jimmy. And a quick one for me. Just when we were in Regina after the Heritage Classic, I mean, just want people to know that when we were fortunate to share a beverage with you and Craig after as well, and I was pretty new in my job at the Athletic after the change, and it meant the world to me to know that you were reading and commenting. We go back to when the Canucks were the Moose Farm team. You were great to me then, and you're still great to us now, and it's greatly appreciated, Jimmy. We really loved having you on here.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Sean. All the best.
You bet, Jim. Thank you so much. That was Jim Hughson, everybody, and what a phenomenal interview. Ken, that was a big fish that I've been wanting to land for a while. It's great to get him in the boat. Awesome stuff. I love his story. I wanted to talk to him. We never kind of got there to talk about his love of the wild because, BC is such a phenomenal place, in Fort St. John. That's another interesting one I wanted to talk to him about because he had little remnants out of it about, coming out of a small town like that. I don't think it's that easy. Both you and I have experienced that. And I know I came, I think, late to this profession. I mean, I didn't come into journalism until I was about 28 years old is when I had my first job. I didn't go on Hockey Night in Canada until I was 35. I came to it late because I came from a small town. I took one of those aptitude tests in high school, and it said, your best job, the job for you is to be a journalist. And I just remembered looking around Lactabani and being like, I don't see any journalists coming out of this town. You know what I mean? So I loved his kind of insight about coming from the small town like that, and that idea of him leaving and going back to the small town and kind of reloading and coming back out, I think is a story that a lot of small towners understand. You're probably one of the people who understand that, Ken.
Oh, for sure. And I'm super fortunate. I mean, being from Altona, my dad worked at CFAM at Golden West Radio, where Elmer Hildebrandt built a great, this is building something with your bare hands from the ground up. I mean, I've told the story before on different platforms. Well, when I was a kid, I got to meet Danny Gallivan. Because why? Because Elmer Hildebrandt brought him to town for a sportsman's dinner. I mean, these things don't happen in a town of 3,000 people, and I don't even know if I was a teenager yet at that time, but a moment like that mattered to me. I mean, I grew up around radio. I mean, I originally I wanted to do play-by-play. I mean, I found a different path, but to be able to have those opportunities and to be around those kinds of things and those kinds of people, and then for us to be able to kind of grow up and share times and stages with legends is just really awesome. I mean, the whole thing, if you can see it, you can be it. That's a thing, but it's only a thing if people around you are doing it and if you put in the work to get there. And I don't know, it's just such a privilege to be in this industry. It has been a tough time for the industry at various times, but I'm very thankful, and today is another great example of why we're thankful. Getting to have these kinds of conversations with people who we respect and admire is just such a fun thing, and to be able to share them with our audience, I think, is a real privilege.
You bet. And this is the last thing I'll say. Ken, you brought up that night at the Heritage Classic in Regina. You and I, we weren't working together in this capacity at that time.
Foreshadowing, buddy. Foreshadowing.
Exactly. Sitting and having a couple beers with Jim Hughson and Craig Simpson, who were phenomenal to us that night and just absolutely wonderful people. we've said it before, this industry is filled with wonderful people. And one of the things I love about doing these shows that we do is our audience here and the audience that's going to be watching this going forward got to sit down and see what a great guy Jim Hughson is. They've got to see what a great guy Craig Simpson is in the past. And we just thank you all for tuning in and checking it out. We really appreciate that. We will be back tonight for the post-game show, as there is going to be quite a tilt between the Winnipeg Jets and the Edmonton Oilers. Hoping you come back and join us for that. Spread the word about this. These interviews are phenomenal, and we love having people check them out and see them. And if you haven't gone to our YouTube page yet, make sure you do. Go click subscribe and like. And it was great to see everybody. We will see you in a couple hours after the game.